Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started while people are still coming in. So we're hosting this conversation from Chubuktuk, which is otherwise known as Halifax in Nova Scotia, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq, which is governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties. And I want to welcome you from whichever land you're joining us from. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brooke Thorndycraft, and co-hosting today for the first time, which is very exciting, is my partner, Joanne Kerrigan. And I started our company, Big Waves, in 2020, and Joanne joined just about a year ago. And we specialize in making the work of changemakers feel better by supporting relational shifts, particularly around communication, collaborative processes, conflict, and strategic clarity. And we also offer more broadly supports and invitations for anyone to pursue shifts in these areas. And one of these open invitations is this series, Ripples and Rumbles, where we think together about ideas, patterns, practices, and insights that can nurture us in our collective pursuit of liberation. And more specifically, Ripples and Rumbles is about subversion. And the dictionary definition of subversion is to turn from below. And we think that below in this definition as places that are hidden, unspoken, taken for granted, invisible, both inside ourselves and in our relationships. And in this second season of Ripples and Rumbles, we've been exploring subversive ideas of knowing. So knowing from outsiderness and edge and shadow work, knowing from disorientation, knowing from the body, imagination. And we've been wondering about what kinds of knowing are prioritized and reproduced and what kinds are ignored or silenced. And we set the stage with the first interview with epistemologist Sofia Ortiz Hinojosa, followed by unforgettable, just so enjoyable conversations with Kai-Cheng Tom, Sage Hayes, and Amani Will. And today we'll conclude the season with a step back from knowing to just simply being in a conversation with Dr. Sue Mehrtens. And Joanne's going to be guiding this conversation. I'll be taking more of the support role. And at this point, I'll ask her to tell us a bit about this finale and our guest. So Joanne.
Take it away. Thank you. Yeah, and before I get into it, actually, I'm just going to do one more little piece on housekeeping, which is that we're recording the session. We eventually share this talk online publicly. As far as participation goes, we are keen about questions, and the way that we're going to manage that is we're going to ask you to stay on mute until the question period, but you can use the chat. Brooke, you might want to check and make sure that the settings for chat are going to be conducive to this, but Brooke's going to be gathering up your questions in the chat for the question period. So when you have curiosities or points of interest during the proceedings, if you want to just drop those there, that'll be great. We're looking forward to that. What else? Oh, technical difficulties. Also, please DM hit Brooke with a message in the chat there, and she will sort that out with you. And I think that that's it. I can actually proceed now to introducing the wonderful Dr. Sue Mehrtens. We are super excited to have you here today, Sue. I'm gonna actually start from a quote. I'll get to a bio in a moment, just some sort of highlights. And before I do that, I just wanted to share an excerpt of an essay that we read last summer. This is where this all came from. Brooke and I encountered this essay last summer, and that led us to inviting Sue to join us in this conversation. Here's the excerpt, quote, "The unknown is real, and we have to face this and be okay with not knowing. Using a term mystics employ, we must appreciate the cloud of unknowing and face the fact that we're not in control here, that nature knows best, and that our society would function far more efficiently if we followed nature's ways." End quote. So as we were planning an exploration of knowing and subversion of knowing, we were really drawn to this idea of ending the series on a shift like this, kind of away from knowing. So now, just a brief introduction to Sue's work. so extensive. This will be very brief and highlights, but she has been a teacher for over 50 years. She has a PhD in medieval studies from Yale University. She later earned a master's in transpersonal counseling. Sue is uh, maybe most known as the founder of the Jungian Center for the spiritual sciences. And in private practice, she works with people around the world in archetypal astrology, in dream work. Um, Sue is the author or the co-author or the editor of many books, one of which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. But so I think we'll just begin with gratitude to you, Sue, for joining us today and last week, and the correspondence over the months to bring this into being. Welcome.
I'm very grateful. Thank you for having me.
Um, So I was thinking about how to launch into this, and I thought that, as promised just now, maybe talking about a particular one of your books is a good starting point because it sort of ties so much of your biography together, from the medieval to the Jungian, to astrology, and also this wonderful practicality that we see in so much of your work, looking for the applications to day-to-day life. The book I'm talking about, you may have guessed, is Living Alchemy, Using Ancient Wisdom to Go with the Flow of Life. Yes. So, if you would, tell us a bit about the book.
Well, this, like many of my books, started as a student's inquiry. And then I put in my dream journal, should I should I write such a book? I turn everything over basically to my inner wisdom. And so I got a sense that this would be useful. But then that was like a Thursday night. Saturday, I always work on my dreams for that past week. And I sat at the computer right behind me there, and my fingers wound up stuck to the keyboard for the better part of 5 hours as the entire sketch or organization of the book came out. And it became, it's my favorite book because it wrote itself. I love it when books write themselves. And that was it. Then I just basically went into Jung's CW12, otherwise known as his picture book, and took some of the illustrations from the various alchemists' work to illustrate the cover and parts of the book. But that was the only part I really had to work on. The actual text just flowed out.
Wow, that's
It can
beautiful.
happen, it can happen if you release and you're open and you surrender to your inner wisdom. That's sometimes how it shows up.
All of us who have ever tried writing are dreaming of this right now, for sure. And so, if you wanted to give somebody a quick sort of précis of the book, what it contains, what we can learn from it, what would that be?
Well, first off, there are two parts. The first part is a précis or overview of alchemy, which everybody thinks is this ridiculous thing of turning lead into gold, right? But Jung recognized that it is a close analogy to his brand of psychology in terms of alchemists. We could think of ourselves as alchemists coming to know ourselves better. And the first part, which is short, basically introduces the terms of alchemy and, some basics. The biggest part, part two, is actually living it. How do we live it? And then, since I didn't want to invade anyone else's privacy, I took my own life as examples. And to a lot of people, it's a surprise. They think of alchemy as this weird thing, but we live it every day in all sorts of ways. And that's what I wanted to, get people to understand. And the course that's coming up in April and May here at the Jungian Center will be on living alchemy. Very
Mm,
hands-on, how do you live alchemy.
Can you give us one example?
Well, I built a house here, and that is the alchemical process called the coagulatio, which is about taking an idea and making it concrete. In this case, I wrote the sketch of the house on the proverbial back of an envelope, took it over to the outfit that was going to build it, and then they actually did pour concrete for the foundation. And that's how the house appeared.
Right? And so then in terms of like this course that's coming up, give me an idea of the kind of thing, again, just an example, that someone could learn from the course to begin to live with alchemy.
Okay, well, we're going to start with the two most common alchemical operations, the transitio and the projectio, or transition and projection, which we're living in multiple transitions now, which leaves people feeling anxious, confused, maybe a bit disoriented, sensing vaguely that something's going on, but they can't put their hands on it. And then, of course, alchemy helps us understand specifically what those shifts are. And then the projection is, you see it all the time. Oh, I'm laughing now. We have the madman here that's running the US now. He projects all the time, and he'll talk about how, Ukraine started that war, I mean, this is projection, and we do this as a way partly to become conscious, but most people, of course, they're not interested in becoming conscious, so they don't recognize it for what it is. But that's probably the two archetypes of change we're going to start with.
Right
And
on.
then there'll be others, like the separatio, which you do in the kitchen every day, if you're cutting up carrots or, separating eggs, you're practicing the separatio.
Very nice. That's a great sounding course. I'm going to take a look at that afterwards for sure. It was making me think about, yes, tying back to some of the earlier conversations in the series. Um, if I want to join this conversation to those, because we did, I don't know if this is going to be the right use of the new word I just learned, but if this is correct, separatio, we kind of made a little separation in our minds about how to wrap the season out. And, that quote that I shared of yours from that essay at the beginning, where you say, the unknown is real. We have to face it. We have to be okay with not knowing. And that society would benefit if we get more accepting about not knowing. And so it's making me wonder, Sue, how do you think we're doing as a society with getting more accepting about not knowing? And I'm going to drop a follow-up now, but I'll remind you later if I need to. I'm also kind of interested, what would be say we're not doing well, what would be the benefit to us of getting more accepting?
Mhm. Okay, well, as I responded to your query that you sent a couple days ago, society can mean Canada, it can mean the US, it can mean places like Bhutan. And I think, we have to pick which society are you talking about. And I think in the case of Bhutan, everything I hear, they're quite comfortable living in the cloud of unknowing and the sort of mystical realm, and they're making very serious, grounded, practical progress in protecting their environment and trying to live in alignment with ecological roles. At the opposite extreme now, you have, unfortunately for me, my country, which is falling into more and more disrepair, or, frantically going backwards in the sense of making any kind of progress. So it varies. Now, I think that in places that value consciousness, like Bhutan, There are people that are very comfortable in not knowing, not having rational, logical ways of knowing, but more intuitive ways of knowing. That's not true much in the United States. So I would say we're not doing very well. We weren't doing too well, and now we're doing even less well with the madman that's in the White House.
Maybe then I have two follow-ups. So one is, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about why that is? And then, what could be seen in the United States or anywhere that this is happening, if you could turn it around and kind of accept that cloud of unknowing or embrace that cloud of unknowing.
Well, okay, first, if I take the United States and why we're going through this now, this is karmic. Okay, we're in a time of karmic payback. And the United States has an enormous history of karma in the sense of enslavement, writing slavery into the Constitution in the 3/5 clause, which at the time in 1787, Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, told them, they were all his friends that were writing the Constitution, he heard about their writing slavery into the document. He said, national crimes require national punishment. And this is one of our times of national punishment. The Civil War obviously wasn't enough to, clear the karma. And now we are experiencing that again.
And so, yeah, if there was a path out, like paint me a picture of a future state that is healthier, is safer, but as a direct result of the relationship, in society around knowing and not knowing.
Well, I'm going to resort here to Jung. He would say that the way out is to become conscious. The way out, in other words, is the way in the sense of coming to know our inner life, and in particular, our inner wisdom.
Yeah, this is really bringing me around to something that, I've really been uh, eager to hear from you about, in the show and its dreams. In the season so far, we've been talking about all these different ways of knowing, embodied knowing, sensory knowing, things that are not purely rational. And we've been talking with you about experiences that are not really knowing per se, and yet are absolutely central to the human experience. So, foremost in my mind, in this moment at least, dreams. So I'm wondering, at the most basic level, especially to hear from you, what are dreams? Like what do you say are dreams? What are they for?
Well, Jung, this is pure Jung now. Dreams are how the psyche speaks to us. Dreams, in other words, are how we access our inner wisdom. And they are, in a way, the most efficient because we're sleeping anyway, right? So why not put those 7, 8 hours to good use? And you can get a lot of good information and knowings from your inner wisdom. The thing that I like about inner wisdom is it exists outside time and space. So you can know what's coming long before you actually have to experience it. And it makes you able to plan. And I've experienced that in my own life, having dreams that were 4 or 5 years in the future, but it allowed me to plan realistically for, the future. And that's a nice thing because that part of us, and it's in all of us, is not bound by space and time.
how um, how is that? Help me understand that it isn't bound by space and time.
It seems to be the nature of the unconscious.
It's just in the intrinsic nature.
Of the unconscious, yes. In other words, there's a part of us that's bound in time and then processes reality through the left brain, logical, rational, quantitative analysis. But then there's this other part of us that is non-rational and exists outside space and time and operates more through intuition and feelings.
Okay.
And that's how we can know without knowing how we know.
And I know how much time and energy and sort of passion that you have poured into this realm throughout your life. And I'm kind of curious about like if somebody were wanting to make a start, towards this kind of work, uh, how long does it take before you might, experience some results? How, when would you actually start to make a change, through and I guess also what kinds of steps are good first steps, would you say?
The first thing, and you see a result pretty much immediately, is to to shift the attitude in our culture, well, especially America, because we're so deeply immersed in materialism. You have to shift to say there are really two parts of me. There's the logical, rational part that's here in this material realm. And then there's this other part of me that I may not be fully aware of yet, but there is this other part of me that's non material and that doesn't operate in the same way. That's the first and essential shift, because that's by concretely doing that, you're opening yourself to a whole other realm or dimension of reality. And there is almost, in my experience, an immediate uplift that somehow you realize, oh, I'm much bigger than I thought I was. And I have a level of wisdom I didn't realize I have. Now, that you're not going to believe immediately, that it follows through, later steps. But Jung would say the next steps would be to watch, because the psyche will respond. It will respond in one of four ways. In dreams that you begin to remember, we all dream, but people say, oh, I never dream. You always, everyone dreams. It's psychologically a very important part of staying sane from the various sleep research that they've done. So it's dreams. You may get psychic responses via dreams. You may get psychic responses in synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that happen in outer life. You may get physical responses. Your body may respond in various ways. And the fourth is intuitions or flashes of insight.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much that I want to pursue there. What time is it? I might come back. I'm going to make a note. Um, yes, because there was something that we talked about in the prep session that I wanted to be sure to get into, especially at this sort of moment. And it's that piece around Jung and individuation and, and also, well, and many other thinkers, Kessler, but just that mix of kind of like, working on yourself to become a better contributor to collective pursuits, and to bring it into like our context here at Big Waves, in some organizational thinking, quoting, I've got a line from Frederick Laloux, from Reinventing Organizations. He says, after many successive steps of disidentification, as we learn to be fully independent and true to ourselves, it dawns on us, paradoxically, that we are profoundly part of everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, how have you made sense of this paradox yourself and with your students?
Well, first off, Jung would say everything is connected to everything else, which is one of the basic laws of ecology. And he recognized that before the ecologists were articulating this, flat out. But he said that individuation is a process that differentiates you from the herd so that you become clear as to your unique set of skills, talents, and interests, which then equips you to serve the whole with your unique set of offerings. But as you become differentiated, you realize this is paradoxical, and Jung loved paradox. You realize you are very much part of the larger whole, just by virtue of being a unique individual. You have a special place in the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful, really. Um, Where are we? Yes. I'm going to take a moment to drop a couple of links. Well, Brooke will drop the links in the chat now. I imagine that folks are curious about the center if they didn't already know of the center. So the first link is going to be to the Jungian Center of the Spiritual Sciences, so that people can learn more about Sue and her work. Um, the other link that we were going to drop today is an offering that we created, that Brooke and I created recently, that we thought felt well paired with today's show. It's the beginning of a series, actually, of resources based in what's sometimes called unknown knowns, or tacit knowledge, and just the idea of the role that plays in collaboration in groups, the ways that we can um, understand that better, activate it to strengthen our collaborations in our groups. The first one actually is specifically focused on learning cultures, moving away from blame, fear of failure, fear of mistakes, that sort of thing. So there should be a link to take a closer look at that if that's of interest. And then, we always will let you know about how you can stay in touch with our work through the mailing list. So there's going to be a link, or there's a link now for you to plug in there if you want to just sort of keep up with what we're doing, talking about events like this, and so on. So then with that, I'm gonna allow myself now to get to my favorite point of this interview. I've been excited about this, and Sue had offered in our conversation last week to prepare for this some insights about current events from a global or a geopolitical perspective, but through an astrological lens. And anybody who is watching, who knows me personally, is going to be waiting for me to bring the astro into this thing. And so here we are. It has happened. So what is an astrological view of this moment that we're experiencing right now, which contains so much uncertainty for people, and worry, and fear?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, specifically to the United States, Pluto has come around to conjunct the US natal Pluto. This is something that happens only in the history of nations, because Pluto's circuit is 248 years long. So a person doesn't live that long, but nations do. And when that happens, Pluto coming back to Pluto, in the history of other nations, it's timed revolution. Now, going along with that are two cycles that are in transition that are also affecting people. They may not know about them, but this is important to be mindful. These are the cycles of what Jung called the Holy Ghost movement, and then the cycle of Pisces shifting into the age of Aquarius. And Jung wrote about both of these extensively. The Holy Ghost movement is a shift that's occurring from the age of the sun, characterized by the connection to the New Testament and the story of Jesus and the setting up of Christianity, to the age of the Holy Spirit, where people no longer basically go to church, they don't follow creeds, they don't have a lot of use for dogma, but they have internalized their inner wisdom, or what Jung called the self with a capital SELF. It doesn't have anything to do with selfishness, but that's your inner divine. And people now more and more want to experience that, as opposed to listen to tiresome sermons and preaching of, guilt trips and all this stuff. So that's the shift in called the Holy Ghost movement that goes back to a Franciscan friar of the 12th century by the name of Joaquin de Flora. So that's the first transition. And we see it in churches emptying out and churches becoming, rec centers and private houses. The second is the shift to from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And this we see, and again, there's an overlap of time, but you see this in the shift from a vertical orientation of culture, where people were, wrapped up in faith and worship and all this, to a horizontal culture where people are very much more concerned with things of this world. And in the age of Aquarius, which is all about humanitarianism, it's about electronics, because it's ruled by Uranus, the planet associated with electricity. And so we see all this stuff of computers and high tech and artificial intelligence. This is all very Aquarian. But also Aquarian is humanitarianism, a concern for justice and fairness. And it's very progressive. The myth that's associated with Uranus is the myth of Prometheus. He's the Titan that brought fire to man. He stole fire from Zeus. And it's that progressive part of us that will do things like, challenge the gods to bring helpful things to humanity. So this is a very, very interesting, and Jung felt very crucial time in our collective reality, because it's global. The US is just that Pluto on Pluto. The problem is the US is not, Djibouti or, Mali. It's a rather prominent country. And as we're going through this torturous time, the world as a whole is affected, unfortunately.
Amazing. What's the connection between Jung and astrology is where I'm trying to pose a question here. I wasn't really aware of this connection. How much it, how strong a connection is it? Is this actually sort of parallel study focuses of yours, or are they completely connected?
Oh, no, I would say they're quite connected. And I have to say, both for Jung and myself, there was some trepidation because both of us were, well, PhDs, we're academics, we're logical. And when I was introduced to astrology, I didn't even realize, I thought this was one of my students at College of the Atlantic. I thought she was taking me to another therapist. And I get right at her doorstep and I find out it's an astrologer. And I said, Miranda, this is bunk. You can't mean I'm supposed to go in and talk about this nonsense? And she said, well, the woman did all the work. I'm still going to have to pay for it. Then, of course, I felt guilty that my student is going to pay for this thing. So I went in and I sat and I'm like, I can't believe I'm listening to this stuff. But over a few minutes, the woman began to tell me everything that was happening to me. And best of all, she told me when the misery was going to be over. So then I accused the woman of being a psychic. And she said, no, 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 no. And then she showed me her books. This was Francis Sequoian, the most famous American astrologer, who in July of 1969 was brought by NASA to Houston because she predicted years and years before the exact day and time that the first man would walk on the moon.
Wow.
She showed me all her books and she said, this is just a symbol system. You learn how to work with the symbols. You can do this too. And that was an intellectual challenge. I could not resist it. So here I am, 41 years later, I'm an astrologer. Now, Jung had the same problem because he knew it was sort of, woo-woo, and he was worried, and he wrote to some of his students, I don't know why I'm attracted to such unpopular things, is how he put it. But he used it, he investigated it, and he wrote about it. But then he had his daughter, Gert Bauman Jung, go into it in depth. And for years at the Institute in Zurich, she gave a course in Jungian astrology, which then I studied under her student, Liz Green. And that's how I became a Jungian astrologer.
Jungian astrologer. Yes, the here we go. This is the academics discovering the esoteric is a place that I was heading. This is nice timing. A lot of the conversation today so far has been could be considered esoteric. I mentioned at the beginning also, I'm aware that how often you have situated your work in very practical, pragmatic applications. I mentioned Frederick Laloux. I could have mentioned Ken Wilber and Integral. But the Brooke, had talked about the Process Work Institute in our prep conversation. So there are a lot of, we think that they're so separate, but they're not really. There's a lot of practical applications of these things that might be considered esoteric. And so I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about like what are your thoughts on that, how these things are not so far apart and what are the practical applications of the esoteric in our work world?
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I go back to my Latin roots. I mean, I studied Latin when I was still a medievalist. So, well, actually, it's Greek. I studied that too. It means that which is hidden or that which is below the surface. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so the exoteric with the EXO is that outward or the obvious visible manifestation. But if you recognize that a lot of important things are below the surface, you can play the game of life with, the full deck. That generally works better if you're trying to play a card game to play with the full deck.
Hmm.
So how do you get in touch with the esoteric? That's the same way you get in touch with your own inner life. And then there are the magic arts. You can use the tarot and the I Ching, and Jung was very big on them because he wanted people to explore the esoteric even as they lived in the exoteric.
Yes. I actually saw just today, oh yes, somebody from the world of facilitation talking about bringing tarot into or I hear you call it tarot. We've been calling it tarot, and we have someone who works in people and culture, what people used to call human resources, uh, doing a similar thing, So it's always of interest to me to, I don't like the feeling of thinking of the world of work, of my work as being this separate thing that, I don't have any soul connection to, that sort of thing. So,
Mm, mm. No, Jung wanted you to have your work be your vocation.
mhm.
In other words, it was your soul's call to you, because that's what vocation is. It's a call. And when
Yeah,
you work and your work is your vocation, you, you would do it even if you don't get paid. It's just so much fun and it's so fulfilling. And it, brings you a level of joy that you can't get just from, grubbing a paycheck.
right. Yes, so true. Um, Now I wonder, I should just check, Brooke, any questions?
Nothing at this point.
That's
If
great.
anyone wants to ask any questions, you're welcome to do so either in the chat or just putting up your hand.
Yeah, we can check for questions now for sure.
I should just say while we're waiting for questions to come in, I wasn't always this open. In fact, I wasn't open at all. When I was, well, I should backtrack. I was a very logical, rational college professor. I thought I'd be a college professor forever. And then November 25th, 1983, I had a dream, a very loud voice that said, friends will die, relatives will die, you will give up everything, and your life will be transformed. I was married at the time, and I said to Ed, did you hear that? And he said, no, I didn't hear anything. So I told him what the dream said. And then I forgot it because, oh, it's just a dream, right? That was my attitude at the time. And 5 days later, it began to come true when I heard about the death of a friend. Then there was a death of another friend. I lost two aunts. I lost an uncle, and everything in my life was falling away. And I thought I was going crazy, which is why, I had all sorts of friends directing me to this counselor, that therapist. One of them even sent me up to the psychiatrist at the Bangor hospital, at which point, of course, I was thinking, geez, maybe I am crazy. And Miranda took me to Francis Sequoian. And basically, what happened was I had to come to recognize that I was going through a major life transition. And all the people I saw, the therapists and counselors, they said, you should work with a Jungian. Now, I'm so out of it, Joanne. I'm hearing UNION. So there's a dream workers union. Oh, okay. This is in the days before the internet, right? And it was really hard. And finally, I, heard it again and I said, look, I can't find this dream workers union. And he said, no, no, it's not union. And he spelled it Jungian. And he said it's a Jungian because he was a German speaking Swiss. So he spelled the guy's name, Jung. And then I went to the college library, and there I found a bookcase, not a bookshelf, but an entire bookcase. Here they are, all the books that he's written and, written about his stuff. And I got to reading, and I realized this is it. This guy knows what I'm talking about. In CW 17, he talks about the inner voice and how we can be called by this inner voice. And I said, this is it. This is it. I'm going to find a Jungian analyst. There were none in Maine. And then, just as I was despairing, one moved in.
Is
And
that is that a meaningful coincidence?
that's a synchronicity.
Okay.
Right? So that was this torturous interval of several years when I had to basically redefine myself from being a college professor to being now what I think of as a Jungian scholar. That's
Mhm.
what I do. And of course I teach because I love to teach. And that's what led me, well, dreams led me to set up the Jungian Center in 2005.
Mhm. Um, Brooke, I see your hand and yes, go for it. Yeah, great.
That's actually, I had a question from earlier when you were talking about dreams and dreams being, the topic of this conversation being around being, and you talked about the four different ways that we can touch into that inner knowing and that inner wisdom, and that you said something about dreams being one of the most like sort of accessible ways that people can access that beingness, right? Like that sort of selfness and the beingness. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about like tangibly, everyone, as you said, everyone dreams. Some people remember their dreams, some people don't remember their dreams. But what is it to actually like what can you share with us about how we build our capacity to actually sort of be with our dreams in this way that's more than just kind of like, oh, I had a weird dream last night, or, but in this sort of deeper, more connected, more conscious, more sort of like self-understanding kind of way? Like, how do people do that?
Well, first, and Jung would say this is always essential, you have to set the intention. In other words, consciously say, I want to explore my inner life. I want to remember my dreams. And I want to have guidance as to how to work with my dreams because it's the language of the psyche. Well, in Canada, maybe you did learn French, from day one. But, the language of the psyche, like any other language, takes a while to learn. But you can learn it. You have to set the intention. I say that simply because the psyche will never violate your free will. If you ask, you will receive. Jesus said as much. But you have to ask. And then you will be guided. And I, for example, started out, as I say, a very logical, rational college professor. And I had a dream, one of these damn voiceover dreams, telling me you better develop your intuition. All right. I know enough now to say, all right, I don't know how to do that. I want help. So that was one night. 2 days later, I get a phone call from my friend Karen Buckley. And she said, my friend Matani would like to write a book. She doesn't have time, but I know that you write books. She'd like to do a labor exchange. If you would write her book, she'd give you this course she's going to teach. And I said, well, what's the course on? She said, it's about developing your intuition.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, no, no. See, but ask and you will receive.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Brooke? Yeah.
Well, that's a start, but there are a lot of details. And for that, I'll send you my PDF on my book, Working with Dreams.
Yeah. I would love that actually. That would be great. Getting back to Brooke, any other questions? No. So just getting back to then, where we had left off on the idea of kind of like, the woo-woo in its everyday uses, and particularly in the world of work. And I know you talked about at one point, you've done some work in just as corporate a setting as, you might want sort of like R&D, that kind of thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, again, dreams led me to work with corporations. I've worked with DuPont, General Motors, AT&T, Sears, smaller companies, and found to my amazement that some of these enormous companies use their intuition in very practical ways, which led me to co-author this book, Intuitive Imagery, a Resource at Work. which depicts how DuPont, the big chemical company, uses this intuitive imagery process to make $350,000, $400,000 commitments to develop their products. You know, as basic and grounded as you can imagine, and committing a great deal of corporate resources on the basis of intuition. That's just one example.
Yeah.
But intuition plays a vital role in, you know, human resource departments, working with people, setting up teams that can be good, um, because, you know, Jung's idea of types, psychological types, allows you to create teams that have complementary skills. And, you know, that is something that can, you know, exploit intuition and apply Jung's ideas in very practical ways.
Mm-hmm.
The Myers-Briggs is widely known in corporate circles.
That's a really good reminder, actually. Things like Myers-Briggs, which we've kind of accepted now, as a more practical, a more pragmatic kind of an application. But it comes from Jung.
Mhm, that's right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, I was wondering about when you have a dream, where you clearly hear a voice giving directions and so on. I can understand how that's going to be something that is motivating for a lot of people to do something with, to act on. But what I'm aware of is that a lot of people have less dramatic experiences
Yes.
of, you know, of prescience, or like almost anyone at a dinner party can kind of trade stories of spooky things, and so on. But as you described about your own experience, prior to some more dramatic occurrences, we have this way of just brushing it off. What's that about? And also, do we have to just wait for something dramatic to move us, or is there a way in which people could be encouraged to notice a little more how many meaningful coincidences there really are, how present your intuition always is?
Mhm. Yes, this is it. What I see, I've only been at this now for 43 years, but I see in that time that Jung is getting to be more well known, like the Myers-Briggs has now infiltrated the corporate world. And some people are getting to be more open. I think it's also keyed to the fact that there are now more women in business, in both the corporate world, but also in entrepreneurial and small businesses. And women have traditionally been more oriented to feelings and intuition, and they recognize the value of it. And you even have some men in fairly high corporate positions recognizing the value of intuition, because you can see the future if you plug into your intuition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, what's going to happen in terms of the long term? I think it's going to be more and more important for people to plug into their intuition as ways to feel safe.
Wow, yes. Will we see actually, just through world events, people grasping more for different ways, right?
Yes. Yeah. And Jung said this is the absolute guaranteed security, because money in the bank, a sugar daddy, a rich spouse, your inheritance, all of these things that are externals can be lost because they're external. But if you've developed your intuition and you have a dialogue with your inner wisdom on a regular basis to the point that you've come to trust it, then you'll always be safe. And I can give you examples. Multiple times my life has been saved by that inner voice.
Mm. I love this hopeful note to start to wrap up. Brooke, uh, if there are any other sort of follow-ups that you had, I'll just sort of leave that with you. And also, if not, you can just start to wrap it up if you want.
There is actually one question in the chat from Jill who says, I'm curious about the connection between inner voice or intuition and social justice work. It's a great question, Jill. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill.
Okay, so intuition connects all of us through what Jung called the collective unconscious. And as we become more deeply connected to our intuition through various practices and constant use of it, we come to realize we really are all one. And so intuition can be put into practical use in terms of how do we bring about better justice and socially responsible organizations. The key is to get practical questions, request answers, and then watch for the results. And that's what these guys were doing at DuPont. You know, they have very practical questions. We have 6 of these products. We can only bring 3 to market. Which will be the 3? So again, you have social justice issues. You formulate some questions and use a process like this. Intuitive imagery is a process where you get the logical left brain out of the way so the intuitive right brain can be heard, and it will have your answers.
Seems like a time to try something different, you know. The planning that we've been involved in around justice or social impact is very, you know, kind of strategic and rational. And I don't have much experience of that sort of an approach. And doesn't it feel like it's time, you know, for a different approach?
Yeah, now it starts practically. In other words, you have practical questions. Should we do this approach or should we do that approach with that particular circumstance? You want to get as practical a set of questions as you can. And then you use a process like this
Mm-hmm.
because it's not meant to be airy fairy or some, you know, fine theory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys are putting $500,000 on the line when they work with this process.
Mm-hmm.
Your consequences might not be that severe, you know, if you were throwing the money away. But the point is, you'll get very practical answers if you ask practical questions. And Jung was not an airy fairy guy. He said, you want to deal with the truth. And for him, the truth is what works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's 4. So many other questions. Okay. Maybe a part 2. Brooke, I think we should probably just wrap up the session. Are
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you, Sue and Joanne. This has been a really interesting conversation to finish off this series of Ripples and Rumbles, which has been quite a season. So thank you as well to everyone who's joined us, to the speakers, to everyone who's been here as a guest. This is also for all of you in conversation with you, and we'd love to know what you would like to subvert next time around. So I'm dropping a link in the chat to, you know, just let us know your thoughts about the season of Ripples and Rumbles in general, any particular topics that you are interested in for future seasons. And stay tuned for what comes next. And we're really wishing you sweet dreams of turning from below. And thank you so much, Sue, for seeing us out for this season.
It was a delight. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say for the recording, in case they don't get the chat, that the email that we're using to collect up any of your ideas about next season is hello@bigwaves.ca. So
Thank you, everyone.
thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you. This was fun.